Good morning, everyone. This is Dave Hammond from M.A.C Solutions. Welcome to this second webinar in the Kepware OPC webinar series. Today's webinar is the second in the series, which is an overview of the KEPServer software itself. You can download the Kepware software free of charge. You can download it and trial it. Just go to kepware.com. And when you download it and you run it, you get 2 hours of functionality. It's full functionality. After 2 hours, it stops polling the devices. Then you can stop it and start it again. You get another 2 hours, and so on and so on. Obviously, that's no good if you want to do a soak test, or you want to do a sort of an 8 hour or 10 hour or a couple of days or over a weekend soak test of comms. If you want to do that sort of thing, then contact us, and we provide a 30-day trial license so you can do a proper longer term test. Okay. So as I said, my name is Dave Hammond. I'm the product manager for the Kepware software at M.A.C Solutions. We've been the UK technical distributor since 2001. And this webinar is concerned with the KEPServer platform itself. And this is an overview and explanation of some of the topologies that you find when Kepware is, when the KEPServer software is used. Okay, the people who this webinar is designed for are people who are interacting with the OPC server, perhaps on an occasional basis. They're not, using it every day, but they want a little bit more of an overview of where it fits and what it does. And also people who manage SCADA applications, who perhaps want to understand where KEPServer fits in their solution, in their topology. And if there are IT or cybersecurity or software engineers watching, this would be good in terms of understanding where Kepware fits and how it fits in with what you're doing in terms of IT solutions and cybersecurity. Since many people will be viewing this software perhaps for the first time, I'm going to do a little bit about Kepware themselves, the company Kepware behind the software, and then we'll go on to the topology diagrams. Okay, Kepware Technologies are a company that's been around since 1995, and 1995 was the year that the OPC Foundation was formed. They're based out of Maine, Portland and Maine in America. And they've been in the business, I say, more than 20 years now. And all they do is really write drivers. They're not a SCADA company. They're not a client, OPC client type customer company. They are a company that writes drivers for automation systems. OPC is their business. If you go to their offices, their reception is just full of awards. You can see just in 2017, some of this information is from around that time, 2017-18. They won pretty much all the awards you can get in 2017 for automation systems. And so this happens year on year on year. They are legendary in terms of the quality of their software. They were purchased by PTC back in 2017, which is a multinational global company in the IoT space. And so they're now part of a bigger organization, which is good. The engineers over there, they work in teams. They have a designer who designs the software, and you have a tester working with them. So nothing leaves there until it's been tested to death. So the quality of the software is very, very good. Okay, so where does Kepware's OPC software fit into a typical topology? What's the purpose of it? So the idea of it is that you move from a complex topology of lots of devices talking to lots of other devices in an unstructured way to something which is much more reduced in terms of complexity. So KEPServer can sit in the middle and act as the player, the conduit from all the different angles, and talk to all the devices below and talk to all the systems above, and in a very organized and structured way. And how it does this. Okay, so on the south interface, you have device drivers. There's over 150 device drivers from a very wide range of devices. On the north side, you then have standards-based client-side interfaces. Again, these are all designed to help connectivity to the systems above. And attached to the core of the software, you then have a number of advanced plugins. And so using that, using the drivers, the interfaces, and the plugins connected to the core, you have a very powerful platform that will talk to pretty much everything on the below it and pretty much anything above it. So here we get onto what I call the diagram of everything. And the idea of this is it explains a typical situation you might find using KEPServer. So I'll launch into it and it'll become apparent what's going on. So here you have the KEPServer software sitting by itself, and you can see there's a lot of white space around that's ready to be filled. A lot of people who will be watching this webinar will know the KEPServer software for its roles in terms of connecting on one side to PLCs and other control devices on the shop floor, and on the other side using OPC DA and now using OPC UA to SCADA and HMI type applications. And most people, when they come to the KEPServer software, see this as the role of the software. And the purpose of this slide here is to actually expand that out and show people all the different things that it can do. So if you have KEPServer in your factory, you could be using it for more than just this this function as it's shown here. So many people will see this is the core, and this is the core of the functionality of the software historically, but it's grown through the years to be far more than that. So PLC drivers on one side and SCADA and OPC clients on the other. In addition to that, there's a whole raft of speciality drivers that Kepware have got for instrumentation and meters and things like oil and gas systems, all sorts of things of that nature. You've got drivers for DCSs, RTUs, inverters, other types of controller. So you can go into a factory and you can do an audit of what's around and what's got COM ports, and pretty much everything you will be able to find a way of getting Kepware to talk to it. You've then got a really nice little driver called Yukon, and there's a webinar specifically about Yukon later in this series. And the Yukon driver is designed to be useful in connecting the KEPServer to devices which are bespoke in nature. So black boxes that you've got in your factory that might have a COM port on the front and a manual that talks about the protocol, but you'll know it's a non-standard protocol, but you need to get data out of it. There's a way of adding bespoke drivers into the Kepware library using the Yukon driver. Also, some manufacturers have building management systems which are involved in the production, and pulling data from building management networks such as BACnet is useful, and keeping all the data in one coherent environment. And the same thing goes for networks. A lot of you there watching today will have Ethernet on the shop floor, and those devices will be talking SNMP. If you send them simple network management protocol packets, they will respond with their status. And SNMP is a very well-known, very widely used protocol in for monitoring IT systems in an IT environment, but Kepware have an SNMP driver for monitoring industrial type Ethernet devices in an industrial environment. So instead of having the IT guys monitor from the IT department the IT hardware on the shop floor, you can use your local interfaces to monitor the IT equipment on the shop floor using the SNMP driver and keep all that data together in one place. The same thing goes for systems that you might have which are legacy type systems. If you have an older instance of a SCADA package that may have been built upon OPC DA, you might have a self-contained machine that has not only a PLC but a SCADA package all within that same PC's control system. You can get data out the back of it using the OPC DA drivers that KEPServer have, so you can tap into older systems, older SCADAs, and pull data out of that as well. So all the comms on the red lines here are on the device side of KEPServer. Those are sources of data which are then being taken through Kepware up to the client side, which is the side to the north, the upper face of KEPServer here. If you like, you can put a second instance of KEPServer there. You can run KEPServer in a dual instance of it to get high availability, which is something that we do find a lot of people doing. And if you do buy a second build of KEPServer with dual licenses, then there's a way of getting those licenses to you at less than the price of two. You pay less than two when you're buying them as a pair, a dual redundant pair. It's very common, especially in the last few years, for people to put databases down right on the same PC where KEPServer is running, and use those databases as a way of catching data, all the raw data straight from the shop floor. That's become more and more common. In fact, the plugin that we sell most of to work with the KEPServer software is the data logger plugin. And putting that data and putting it into an ODBC interface, keeping that data forever down on the shop floor, or perhaps amalgamating it into a central database, is something that a lot of people do. We can also feed data into historians using an older protocol called OPC HDA. That is something that we can do, but the OPC HDA protocol is not particularly well adopted, widely adopted, or widespread. But if you need to feed data into a historian, you can do that with the KEPServer software as well. Some people like to create .NET client applications, which they would give to the operators on the shop floor, deploy them down. These would be applications which is specifically designed for a specific purpose, which are applications that need to give the user the ability to interface with the shop floor equipment, but without having to go to a SCADA station, or without giving them the ability to access everything. You can create a dedicated .NET application which they can use. In order for that to happen, you need to be using something like Visual Studio, but Visual Studio itself doesn't have any knowledge of OPC. So what Kepware have provided now is an application called ClientAce, and ClientAce is a plugin for Visual Studio, and that gives the Visual Studio designer the ability to drag OPC objects straight into their project. The ClientAce is a developer license, so once you've actually developed your application and tested it and want to deploy it, then there's no element of that license that actually goes with the deployment. The deployment from there on in is free. There's no cost to that. So what you're doing is you're buying a ClientAce developer licenses, and then once you've got that, you can create as many .NET clients as you like and deploy them to as many different places as you like, and there's no further cost for that. So below the line is what we find typically people use the KEPServer software to do in a dedicated area. So perhaps on a line, perhaps within a building, perhaps within a small factory. Obviously, OPC UA we covered in the last the webinar, where there's another one coming up in a week or so's time, has a high level of security within it. So what you can do with OPC UA, you can break out through firewalls up to higher level systems, whether they be M.A.Cs or ERPs, or whether you want to take that data and actually pull it to a corporate headquarters and perhaps do the same for other sites and pull all the data to one central dashboard or one central historian. Again, taking OPC UA through firewalls securely across the internet through VPNs, there's no reason you shouldn't do that. It's quite easy to do. And so you could very easily use OPC UA to create a means of getting all the data to the center. If you have an organization where you have a disparate factories and you want to pull everything to the center and get so that the directors can see a helicopter view of all the factories all in one place. And that's very good for keeping things within your own organization, pulling everything to a central dashboard and perhaps creating reports and KPIs and things of that nature from it. But increasingly these days, we're finding people want to use IoT clouds. So within the last few years, the guys at KEPServer have created what's called the IoT Gateway product, which means that you can use the REST and MQTT protocols to get data into IoT environments. So you can push data straight from KEPServer straight into things like Azure, ThingWorks, Amazon Web Services, MindSphere, and Predix, Bluemix, and many, many others. In fact, later in the series, there is a webinar specifically about how you push data into IoT clouds, focusing specifically on Microsoft Azure, which we see as the one that seems to be leading the way in this. So if you want to join in a few weeks' time for that, I think that's number 5 in the series, or maybe possibly number 6. Okay, so you can see here we started off from KEPServer in the middle of a lot of white space, and you can now see that it fits in the middle of a lot of different connections for lots of different purposes. And I hope you know, there's something you can take away from this diagram that might be useful for you. Okay, so a little bit about the software itself. On the south side, on the device side, there's over 150 device drivers. I think I've mentioned it. All of those have very good diagnostics. So there's a diagnostics menu you can turn on, and you can filter the diagnostics very finely to get down to the diagnostics just for a particular device, if you like, even looking for a particular type of packet, if you like. So that's very good for fault finding if you're doing any comms and having issues getting the response you expect. For many of the drivers as well, you can put media level redundancy, which means that if you have a PLC which has got dual Ethernet cards or perhaps dual CPUs, you can actually get KEPServer to connect to that PLC using path A and path B, and be able to switch seamlessly between those two paths should one of the paths disappear. So if you have a sort of a critical PLC which has that type of dual infrastructure, you can make Kepware have that dual approach as well, one level above. For those of you who don't know KEPServer that well, it is the world's most best-selling OPC server. It has been for many, many years. Its stability is legendary. We have people who say they don't have to touch their instance of KEPServer for years. The only thing that will stop the KEPServer running is the environment it's running in, such as the Windows environment or something of that nature. Later in this webinar series, there's a webinar about the programmatical configuration of the KEPServer through third-party apps. You can create through the API, you can create web-based apps to allow people to deploy and configure the KEPServer without having to go into the GUI. They can do it through a web interface. So that's very useful. Again, there's a webinar about that later in this series. And there's also a webinar about the security policies plugin, which adds an extra level of granularity to the security for OPC clients connecting in. So there's lots to explore later in this webinar series about the core of the software itself. On the north side, the guys at Kepware recently been adding more languages to the software. Initially, when it was launched, KEPServer all those years ago was only an English language product. Come the release of version 6, they also included German in there and Japanese. They're working on Spanish, which I think is pretty close. They're also working on French, and I think they're working on some simplified Chinese. So it's very good for international deployments. You can actually configure it one language, switch the language, and all the menus, all the help files will be then in the other language. So it's a lot of work to put it into different languages because there's a lot of help files, and the help files are very, very good. But they're building more and more of that as they move into wider markets. So there's also deep diagnostics on the client side interfaces as well. So again, you can filter the OPC diagnostics down to a particular client connecting to a particular device. If you want to, you can filter it down by lots and lots of different levels. A recap of what we've talked about. We've talked about a little about Kepware themselves, a little bit about where the OPC server fits into a topology. We've gone through the diagram. My name's Dave Hammond, the product manager from M.A.C Solutions. We also sell 2 other OPC products, one called the Cogent Data Hub and another one called the OPC Router. I will be touching on those in a later webinar. I think it's webinar number 10, since they give connectivity on the top of KEPServer to various IT level types of environments, such as ERPs and SAP. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, and I hope you all stay safe and well.